I woke up to a quiet house, the kind of silence that feels heavier than usual. My husband, Liam, had left early for work, his usual cheerful goodbye replaced by a distracted nod. Something had been off for weeks. Late nights, whispered phone calls, and evasive answers piling up like a storm on the horizon. As I made my coffee, unease settled in my chest. Liam and I had been married for 8 years. Ours was a life of quiet simplicity. I worked as a school librarian, and he managed a small auto repair shop in town. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable, or so I thought. A knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. An envelope, plain and unassuming, had been slipped through the mail slot. Inside was a single piece of paper with an address scrawled in messy handwriting. No name, no explanation, just an address in a part of town I rarely visited. I debated throwing it away, but curiosity got the better of me. After my shift at the library, I drove to the address. It was a modest brick building housing a legal office. The name on the door, R. Dalton, attorney at law, meant nothing to me. I hesitated but eventually stepped inside. A young receptionist greeted me with a polite but distant smile. I received this address. I'm not sure why, I stammered, holding up the note. She nodded, as if expecting me. Follow me, please. The office she led me to was dimly lit, lined with shelves full of books. Behind a cluttered desk sat a man in his 60s, his expression neutral. Mrs. Harper, thank you for coming, he said, gesturing for me to sit. I hadn't introduced myself, but he seemed to know who I was. Alarm bells rang in my head. What is this about? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Your husband recently approached my office, he began. He's made arrangements regarding your shared assets. My stomach sank. Arrangements? What kind of arrangements? He hesitated, carefully choosing his words. Liam initiated a process to transfer ownership of your home solely to his name.
What?
That's impossible. I didn't consent to anything. I understand this is a shock, he said calmly, but the documents are legitimate. He's claiming you agreed verbally, which, of course, doesn't hold up without your signature. I stared at him, my thoughts racing. Why would he do this? I can't speak to his motives, but I advise you to act quickly. He slid a stack of papers across the desk. These are copies of the filings. I left the office feeling numb. Liam's actions didn't make sense. Our marriage wasn't perfect, but it felt like betrayal. I needed answers. That evening, Liam came home later than usual. His excuse of busy at work felt hollow. I wanted to confront him, but something held me back. Instead, I decided to observe, to gather evidence before accusing him of anything. Over the next few days, the cracks in Liam's routine became glaring. His phone was suddenly password protected, and he spent more time in his makeshift office than with me. One night, I quietly checked our shared bank account and discovered several large withdrawals I couldn't explain. The final straw came when I found a receipt for a rental property in his jacket pocket. The next morning, I drove to the address on the receipt. It led me to a small apartment complex on the outskirts of town. Apartment 3B. My heart pounded as I climbed the stairs. The door was slightly ajar, and I could hear voices inside. Peeking through the gap, I saw Liam sitting across from a woman I didn't recognize. She was holding a folder, and they were speaking in hushed tones. I didn't stay to eavesdrop. Instead, I left quietly, my mind spinning.
Who is she?
What was Liam hiding? That night, I asked Liam about his day, pretending nothing was amiss. He lied effortlessly, claiming he'd been at work all day. It confirmed my suspicions. The next morning, I hired a private investigator. I never thought I'd resort to such measures, but I needed the truth. A week later, the investigator handed me a file that shattered my world. Liam had been living a double life. The woman from the apartment was his business partner in a failing company he'd started using our savings, without my knowledge. Worse, he had taken out loans in my name. The debt was staggering. That night, I confronted Liam. At first, he denied everything. But when I showed him the evidence, his facade crumbled. He admitted to the business and the loans, justifying it as an opportunity to secure our future. Our future. I shouted. You lied to me, Liam. You've put us in financial ruin. I was trying to fix it, he said, his voice desperate. I shook my head, anger bubbling to the surface. You thought if the business succeeded, what? That it would all magically work out? You risked everything without even telling me. The argument escalated until Liam stormed out, leaving me alone with my fury and disbelief. The next day, I visited R. Dalton, my lawyer. I explained everything: Liam's lies, the fraudulent loans, the ownership transfer, and he assured me we could contest it all. But while there was hope for legal justice, my trust in Liam was shattered beyond repair. As the proceedings unfolded, more of Liam's deceit came to light. He had hidden assets, falsified documents, and manipulated nearly everyone around him. Each revelation felt like a punch to the gut, but it also strengthened my resolve. Months later, the court ruled in my favor. The house remained in my name, and the fraudulent loans were voided. Liam's business collapsed, and he vanished from my life. The ordeal had drained me, but it brought clarity. In the weeks that followed, I began to rebuild. The house, once tainted by conflict, became my sanctuary. Life felt quieter without Liam's presence, a quiet I came to cherish. I threw myself into my work at the library, finding comfort in its familiar rhythms. One afternoon, a phone call interrupted my routine. The investigator I'd hired had news. "Mrs. Harper," he said, his tone serious, "I've uncovered something new. You might want to see it." My heart sank. I thought the worst was behind me, but curiosity and a lingering need for closure compelled me to meet him. The investigator handed me a folder containing documents about a second property Liam had purchased under a false name, a dilapidated cabin in the woods. According to records, he'd used it as a storage site for items he'd pawned for quick cash. Among the items listed were heirlooms from my late grandmother. Determined to recover what was mine, I drove to the cabin. The long, eerie journey through dense forest set my nerves on edge. The cabin was abandoned, its windows boarded up, and the yard overgrown. Forcing the door open, I stepped inside. The air was stale, and dim light filtered through cracks in the boards, casting eerie shadows. Boxes were stacked in the corner, filled with random items. At the bottom of one, I found a velvet pouch containing my grandmother's jewelry. Anger and sadness welled up inside me. Liam's betrayal had cut even deeper than I'd realized. But as I left the cabin, clutching the jewelry, I felt a strange sense of closure. Back home, I returned the heirlooms to their rightful place, a reminder of my family and the values they'd instilled in me. I donated the remaining items to charity, a symbolic act of shedding the weight of Liam's deceit. Slowly, life improved. I reconnected with old friends and rediscovered joy in simple pleasures. One evening, I passed a community center advertising a support group for those recovering from toxic relationships. On a whim, I decided to attend. The group was small but welcoming. Hearing others share their stories of heartbreak and resilience was both painful and inspiring. It reminded me that I wasn't alone and gave me the courage to share my own story. Each meeting became a step toward healing. Months turned into a year, and I found myself thriving in unexpected ways. I picked up painting, a hobby I'd abandoned long ago, and started volunteering at the community center. The pain Liam caused no longer defined me. Instead, it became a chapter in my story, a tale of growth and self-discovery. One day, a letter arrived in the mail. It was from Liam. My hands trembled as I opened it. The letter was brief, filled with apologies. He claimed to be in rehab and working to repay his debts. "I don't expect forgiveness," he wrote, "but I want you to know I'm trying to become a better person." I didn't know how to feel. Part of me wanted to believe he could change, but another part remembered the pain he'd caused. In the end, I chose to let go. Forgiveness didn't mean reconciliation, and I owed it to myself to move forward. Standing on my porch, I felt a deep sense of peace. The house, once a battleground for lies and betrayal, was now a sanctuary, a symbol of resilience. The journey had been painful, but it led me to a future filled with hope and possibility. For the first time in years, I felt free.